The cold dawn awakening. You don't wake gently in 1347. There's no snooze button, no soft alarm, no gradual transition from dream to day. Just cold air biting your face, and the knowledge that if you don't move now, your family doesn't eat today. The darkness is complete, thick as wool. And for a moment you lie there in that strange space between sleep and consciousness, feeling the weight of your husband's arm across your waist, hearing the soft breathing of your children curled beside you in the narrow bed. The straw mattress beneath you has compressed over months of use, and you can feel every ridge of the wooden bed frame through the thin fabric. Your body aches in ways you've stopped noticing. The way you stop noticing the smell of smoke that clings to everything you own. The cold is what moves you. Always the cold. It creeps through the gaps in the wattle and daub walls, slides under the door like something living, settles into your bones with the patience of winter itself. You're wearing the same rough wool shift you wore yesterday and the day before that. The same one you'll wear tomorrow unless it tears beyond mending. It's stained with old sweat, food, dirt, the evidence of labor that never truly ends. Beneath this shift, your skin is its own map of this life. Calluses on your palms, thick as leather. A scar on your forearm from a cooking accident to summers past. Bruises you can't quite remember earning. Your hands find the edge of the blanket. A patchwork of wool scraps you pieced together yourself during the endless dark evenings of last winter. It's heavy but thin, worn in places, and it smells of bodies and smoke, and the faint mustiness of damp that never quite leaves anything in this cottage. You slide from beneath the covers carefully, trying not to wake your husband. He worked until full dark yesterday, and he'll work until full dark today. And the small mercy you can offer is another hour of sleep before the bell rings for morning prayers. Your feet touch the packed earth floor, and the cold shoots up through your legs like a shock. There's rushes scattered across the ground, mixed with dried herbs that were meant to freshen the air. But they're old now, mixed with dirt and bits of food and God knows what else. You'll need to change them soon. Add it to the endless list of tasks that multiply like mice in a grain store. The cottage is a single room, barely larger than the animal shed attached to its side. You share this space with your husband, your 3 living children, and during the coldest months, sometimes the goat. The walls are wattle and daub, woven sticks plastered with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung that you helped repair last spring. There are gaps you can see through when you're looking for them, places where the plaster has crumbled and not yet been fixed. The roof is thatch, thick, and surprisingly good at keeping out rain when it's properly maintained. But maintenance requires time and materials you don't always have. In the corner, there's a small amount of storage. Wooden chests that hold your few possessions. Your second shift, your husband's extra tunic, the children's clothes that get passed down and patched until they're more patched than original fabric. The hearth dominates one wall. And this is where you move now, your body knowing the path even in the darkness. Your eyes are adjusting slowly, finding the faint glow of embers buried under ash from last night's fire. This is the test, the small anxiety that greets every morning. Did the fire survive the night, or will you need to start again from nothing? You kneel on the cold stone hearth, ignoring the protest of your knees, and reach for the poker, a length of iron that's one of your most valuable possessions. Gently, So gently you stir the ash, searching for heat, for life, for that small red glow that means survival. There, thank God and all the saints, there it is. A coal, still living, still holding heat from yesterday's fire. You breathe out slowly, a prayer of gratitude you don't speak aloud, and begin the careful work of coaxing it back to life. This is skilled work, though no one would ever call it that. You add the driest kindling first, small twigs and bits of straw you prepared yesterday for exactly this purpose. Too much air and the ember dies. Too little and it smothers. You blow softly, steadily, watching the glow brighten, feeling the heat on your face, seeing the first small flame catch and hold. It's a tiny victory, but it's yours. And for just a moment, you let yourself feel the satisfaction of it. The fire grows slowly, and you feed it carefully, graduating from kindling to small sticks to larger pieces of wood. Every piece of fuel has been gathered, carried, and stored by someone's labor, usually yours. You spent hours last autumn collecting fallen branches from the forest, dragging them home, breaking them into usable sizes. The larger logs you have are precious, rationed carefully because winter is long and fuel is never abundant. The peat you sometimes burn is better, holds heat longer, but it fills the cottage with a thick smoke that makes everyone's eyes water and leaves a residue on everything. Still, when wood is scarce, peat is a blessing. As the fire catches properly, casting dancing shadows across the walls, you can finally see the space you inhabit. It's not much. The earthen floor, the rough walls, the blackened beams overhead where meat sometimes hangs to smoke, where herbs dry in bundles, where spiders build webs you're too tired to clear away. There's a small window, just an opening really, with a wooden shutter you close at night and during rain. No glass. Glass is for churches and lords' halls, far beyond your reach or even your imagination. The furniture is minimal, built by your husband or his father before him. The bed, a table, a bench, a few stools, wooden bowls and spoons, an iron pot that hangs over the fire, so valuable that you'd save it before almost anything else if the cottage caught fire. Clay jugs for water and ale, a wooden trencher for kneading bread. These are your tools, your possessions, the material evidence of your existence. Behind you, one of the children stirs, and you freeze, hoping they'll settle back into sleep. It's Margaret, your eldest at 7, already old enough to help with tasks, already learning what it means to be a woman in this world. She makes a small sound, something between a whimper and a sigh, then quiets again. You'll need to wake her soon. There's work enough for her small hands, but for now, let her rest. The boys are younger, 5 and 3, curled together like puppies, their faces soft in the firelight. You carried each of them, birthed each of them in this very room, with the village midwife and your mother helping. Your screams muffled by a leather strap between your teeth because loud suffering disturbs the neighbors. You buried 2 others, one who lived only 3 days, another who made it to his first winter before a fever took him. Their names are carved into your heart, but rarely spoken aloud. Grief is a luxury you can't afford to indulge. The fire is strong now, and warmth begins to spread through the room, pushing back the cold inch by inch. You stand slowly, your back protesting, and reach for your outer dress, a long woolen garment dyed a muddy brown with walnut husks. It's heavy and rough against your skin, but it's warm, and it covers the stains and wear of your undershift. You tie it with a woven belt, plain and practical. Your head covering comes next, a simple linen wimple that marks you as a married woman, that hides your hair as modesty and custom demand. Your hair is long. You haven't cut it since childhood, but it's dirty and tangled because washing it is a luxury reserved for perhaps once a month if you're fortunate. You braid it quickly without a mirror because you don't own one, your fingers knowing the pattern by touch alone. Outside, you hear the first sounds of the village waking. A door opening, the sound of someone coughing, the distant bark of a dog. The world is still dark, but it's the darkness before dawn, softer somehow, with the promise of light somewhere beyond the eastern horizon. Soon the church bell will ring, calling everyone to prayers, marking the official start of the day. You'll go, of course. Everyone goes. The priest expects it. The Lord expects it. God expects it. Your faith is real, woven into every aspect of your life. But so is your exhaustion, and sometimes during the prayers, your mind wanders to the tasks ahead, the work that never ends, the weight of another day exactly like the one before. You move to the water jug and find it nearly empty. Of course, there's always something. The well is at the center of the village, a short walk, but not an insignificant one when you're carrying a heavy clay jug in the pre-dawn darkness. You'll need to go soon, before too many others arrive, before the morning rush. But first, the fire needs more fuel. The pot needs to be set up for pottage, and you need to check on the animals in the shed. The rhythm of these tasks is so ingrained, you barely think about them anymore. Your body simply moves, performing the same actions it performed yesterday and will perform tomorrow. A dance of survival, choreographed by necessity. This is your life. Not the life of queens in their castles or saints in their cells, but the life of a peasant woman in medieval England. Your name might be Alice or Joan or Emma, common names for common people, names that will never appear in any chronicle or record. You will never learn to read or write. You will never travel more than 10 miles from the place you were born. You will work until your body breaks down, bear children until your body can't anymore. And when you die, probably before you reach 40, you'll be buried in the churchyard with a wooden marker that will rot away within a generation. No one will remember your face. No one will write your story. But this morning, right now, you are here. Your hands are capable. Your mind is sharp despite the exhaustion. You have kept your children alive through another night. You have coaxed fire from ash. You have woken before dawn because that is what survival demands. And as the first gray light begins to seep through the cracks in your cottage walls, as you prepare to face another day of endless labor, there is something almost sacred in the simplicity of it. You are alive. You are moving. You are continuing. And for a medieval peasant woman, that is no small thing. That is everything. Morning rituals, fire, water, and bread. The fire is your responsibility. If it dies completely overnight, you'll need to beg a coal from a neighbor, and that kind of debt isn't forgotten in a village where everyone remembers everything. But this morning, you've been fortunate. The flames are growing steadily now, licking at the larger pieces of wood you've added, and the cottage is slowly, reluctantly warming. The light from the fire casts everything in shades of orange and amber, making shadows dance across the walls like living things. You reach for the iron pot, heavy and blackened from years of use, and hang it on the hook above the flames. This pot is older than your marriage, passed down from your husband's mother, and it will outlive you if you care for it properly. It's one of the few things of real value you own. Water first, always water. You pick up the clay jug, feeling its familiar weight in your hands, the slight chip on the rim where Margaret dropped it last month. You're fortunate it didn't shatter completely. Replacing it would have meant trading eggs or cheese, resources you can't easily spare. The jug is large enough to be useful, but not so large you can't carry it when full. Everything in your life is measured this way, by practicality, by what your body can manage, by what serves the needs of survival. You wrap your shawl tighter around your shoulders. It's a threadbare thing, more holes than fabric in places. But it's another layer between you and the morning cold, and that matters. Stepping outside is like entering a different world. The air hits you immediately, sharp and clean, and so cold it makes your lungs ache. Your breath comes out in clouds, visible proof of life in the pre-dawn darkness. The sky is just beginning to lighten in the east, a pale gray line on the horizon that promises dawn but doesn't deliver it yet. The village spreads out before you in the Gluma collection of cottages, much like your own, huddled together as if for warmth, their thatched roofs dark shapes against the slowly brightening sky. Smoke rises from a few chimneys already, thin streams of gray that drift upward before disappearing into the vast darkness above. The path to the well is worn smooth by generations of feet, a pale line of packed earth cutting through the village center. You know this path so intimately you could walk it blind. Your feet find the way automatically, while your mind wanders to the tasks ahead. The pottage needs barley, and whatever vegetables you have left from storage. The bread dough you started yesterday needs to be shaped and baked. The children need feeding. The animals need tending. Your husband will need something to take to the fields. The list is endless, always endless. And you've learned not to think of it all at once, or the weight of it would crush you. The well sits at the heart of the village, a circular stone structure with a wooden frame and a rope and bucket system that creaks with every use. It's ancient. No one remembers when it was built. It simply has always been here, the literal and figurative center of village life. This is where water comes from, where news spreads, where women gather and talk and share the small intimacies that make life bearable. The well is community made tangible. You're not the first to arrive this morning. Agnes is already there, a woman perhaps 10 years older than you, her face weathered like old leather, her hands gnarled from a lifetime of labor. She's pulling up the bucket as you approach, the rope groaning under the weight. Cold enough to freeze a saint this morning, she says by way of greeting. Her voice is rough, worn down by years of breathing smoke and shouting over wind. You nod in agreement, setting your jug down on the stone rim of the well. There's a protocol to this, an unspoken order. Agnes was here first, so she fills her vessels first, then you, then whoever comes next. It's a small thing, but order matters in a world where chaos is always threatening to break through. Agnes fills her first jug, then her second, water sloshing over the sides and splashing onto the stone. Heard the miller's wife took fever yesterday, she says, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. This is how information moves in the village, woman to woman, well to well, morning after morning. Bad, you ask, taking the bucket from her and lowering it back down into the darkness. You hear the splash far below, feel the bucket grow heavy as it fills, then begin the work of hauling it back up. Your shoulders protest immediately. This is not easy work, and you'll make this trip at least twice today, maybe 3 times, depending on what needs doing. Agnes shrugs, a gesture that could mean anything. She's young yet, might pull through. Then again, might not. The Lord decides these things, not us. It's the standard response, the acceptance of powerlessness that characterizes so much of your existence. People get sick. People die. You pray, you hope, but mostly you just continue, because what else can you do? The bucket reaches the top, and you tip it carefully, watching your jug fill with clear, cold water. Well, water is a gift, clean and reliable. Unlike the stream that runs through the village, which gets muddy and suspect, especially after rain. You've heard stories from your grandmother about villages where the wells ran dry, where people had to walk miles for water or drink from questionable sources. The fact that your well has never failed is a blessing you don't take for granted. Even on mornings when your shoulders ache and the cold makes your fingers clumsy, you fill your jug to just below the rim, full enough to be useful. Not so full it will slosh out as you walk and hoist it onto your hip. The weight settles into your body and you adjust automatically, your spine curving to accommodate it, your muscles engaging in a pattern they've learned through repetition. If you're finding comfort in these quiet morning rituals, let me know in the comments what time you're listening from. My love knowing who's awake with me in these small hours. 2 more women arrive as you're preparing to leave Joan and her daughter, both carrying multiple vessels. You exchange nods, brief smiles, the small acknowledgments that constitute friendship in a world where everyone is too busy for lengthy conversations. Joan mentions something about her pig being ill, asks if you know any remedies. You suggest hanging a rowan branch in the pen to ward off evil influences, and mixing ash from the hearth into its feed. Whether this will work or not is anyone's guess, but it's what your mother told you and what her mother told her. And the sharing of this knowledge feels like passing down something valuable, even if its value is more in the comfort of tradition than proven effectiveness. Walking back to your cottage, you see more signs of the village waking. A man emerges from his door, stretching, yawning, scratching himself without concern for modesty. Children's voices carry from somewhere, already arguing about something inconsequential. A rooster crows, late to its duty of announcing dawn. The sky is definitely lighter now, that deep gray that comes just before the sun breaks the horizon. You can make out colors instead of just shapes: the brown of the earth, the dark green of the few trees that dot the village, the paler shade of thatch on the roofs. The world is becoming solid again after the dissolution of night. Back inside your cottage, the fire is still burning well. You pour water from your jug into the iron pot hanging over the flames, reserving some in a smaller vessel for drinking and washing. The water in the pot will form the base of your pottage, the thick grain and vegetable stew that will constitute the main meal for your family today, and probably tomorrow, and the day after that. You move to your small store of food, kept in sacks and wooden boxes, along one wall. The The barley sack is getting light, jewel, need to be careful with portions. Make it last until you can trade for more, or until the next harvest comes in. You measure out a careful amount, letting the grain run through your fingers into the pot. It makes a soft pattering sound as it hits the water, and you watch it sink and swirl before settling. Vegetables next. You have onions, wrinkled and sprouting, but still usable. You have some dried peas, hard as stones, that will need long cooking to become edible. There's a turnip, small and slightly soft, but you cut away the bad parts and dice the rest into rough chunks. This is the art of peasant cooking, making something from whatever you have, wasting nothing, stretching resources as far as they'll possibly go. You add everything to the pot and give it a stir with a wooden spoon worn smooth by use. The smell isn't much yet, just grain and water and the faint earthiness of vegetables. But as it cooks through the morning, it will thicken and develop into something that, if not delicious, is at least filling and warm. The children are stirring now. You hear Margaret whisper something to her brothers. Hear the rustle of bodies moving under the blanket. Your husband makes a sound, half groan, half sigh, the sound of a man waking to another day of back-breaking labor. Soon they'll all be up, needing attention, needing food, needing you to be the center that holds everything together. But for just this moment, you have the relative quiet of early morning, the satisfaction of tasks begun, of fire tended and water fetched and food set to cooking. These are small things, unremarkable things, the kinds of things that no one ever praises or even notices, but they're the foundation of everything. Without water, there's no cooking, no cleaning, no life. Without fire, there's no warmth, no food preparation, no light in the darkness. Without your labor, performed again and again, day after day, your family would simply cease to function. You think about bread while the pottage begins its slow simmer. Yesterday you made a dough using flour ground from your own grain at the village. Mill, a process that cost you a portion of that grain as payment to the miller. The dough has been sitting overnight in a wooden bowl, covered with a cloth, rising slowly in the cool air. You uncover it now and see that it has indeed risen, though not dramatically. Your yeast is wild yeast, caught from the air and cultivated in a starter you've maintained for years, feeding it with flour and water, keeping it alive like a small, demanding pet. The bread you make is dense and dark, made from barley or rye or a mixture of grains. Nothing like the fine white wheat bread you've heard exists but never tasted. That's for nobles, for people whose lives you can barely imagine. You turn the dough out onto your wooden board and begin to knead it, pushing with the heels of your hands, folding, turning, pushing again. Your hands know this rhythm, this work. Kneading bread is meditative in its way, repetitive and soothing, and your mind drifts as your hands work. You think about Margaret, growing so fast, already showing signs of becoming a woman. Soon she need to know everything. You know how to manage a household, how to stretch resources, how to endure. You think about your boys, wondering what kind of men they'll become, hoping they'll be strong enough for the life ahead of them. You think about your husband, a good man in his way, who works until his body screams and never complains, who provides what he can and expects you to make it enough. The dough is ready. You shape it into a round loaf, score the top with your knife in a cross pattern partly to help it bake evenly, partly as a blessing, asking God to make this bread sufficient. You set it on a flat stone near the fire to bake, not in the flames, but near enough that the heat will work its transformation. Real ovens are rare in the village, shared resources that require payment to use. So most households bake like this, in the heat of their own hearths. It's not ideal, but it works, and working is all that matters. The cottage is warmer now, the fire's heat finally pushing back the cold. Your husband sits up, running his hands through his hair, his face still creased from sleep. "Morning," he says, his voice rough. You nod in response and hand him a cup of ale-week ale, the kind that's safer to drink than water, that everyone drinks from children to elderly, because it won't make you sick the way bad water can. He drinks deeply, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, and begins the process of readying himself for the day. His work is in the fields, plowing or planting or harvesting, depending on the season, breaking his back under the sun or the rain or the wind, working land that isn't his for a lord he rarely sees, bound by obligations and traditions older than memory. Margaret emerges from the bed, her hair a wild tangle, her face soft with sleep. "Help me with the boys," you tell her, and she nods, already moving to wake her brothers with the gentle efficiency of a child who has been helping since she could walk. This is her education, not letters or numbers, but the practical knowledge of survival. She's learning by watching you, by doing, by repetition. By the time she's 10, she'll be able to manage most household tasks. By the time she's 12 or 13, she'll be ready for marriage, ready to start the cycle again in her own cottage, with her own husband, her own children. The thought makes you sad in a way you don't examine too closely. This is simply how things are. The morning is fully here now. Light streams through your small window, pale and thin but real. The village is awake, everyone moving through their morning rituals, everyone preparing for another day of labor. The church bell will ring soon, calling you all to prayers, and you'll go, wiping your hands on your apron, checking that your head is properly covered, gathering your children and joining the slow procession to the church. But for now, for just these few remaining moments, you stand in your cottage with the smell of cooking pottage and baking bread, with the warmth of the fire on your face, and you breathe, just breathe. Because, in a life measured in labor and duty and endless necessity, even breathing can feel like a small rebellion, a tiny claim to something that belongs only to you. The fields, your other home, your back will never not hurt. That's just a fact of life. By the time you're 30, you'll move like you're 50. By 50, if you make it that far, you'll move like the earth itself is pulling you down. The fields wait for no one, show mercy to no one, and demand everything you have to give, and then demand more. After prayers, after a quick meal of the pottage you've been simmering all morning, after checking that the children are settled with tasks of their own, you head out to the fields that dominate the landscape around your village. These fields are your other home, the place where you spend more waking hours than anywhere else, especially during planting and harvest seasons. You carry tools with you, a wooden rake, a sickle with a blade you've sharpened as best you can on a whetstone. Your hands close around familiar handles, worn smooth by your grip and the grip of the women who worked these fields before you. The village operates on a system older than anyone can remember. 3 great fields that rotate their use year by year. One field lies fallow, resting and recovering its strength. Another grows wheat or rye. The third grows barley, oats, or peas. Your husband holds certain strips of land in each field, not owned but held in tenure, the right to work it and keep some portion of what it produces. But there are obligations work, days owed to the Lord, tithes owed to the church, payments in kind to the miller and the smith. After everyone takes their share, what's left is yours, and it never feels like enough. The fields stretch out before you, vast and flat, broken only by the occasional hedge or boundary marker. They're divided into long, narrow strips, each family working their allotted portions, everyone visible to everyone else. Privacy doesn't exist out here. Your labor is public, observed, compared, judged. The work changes with the seasons, but it never stops. Today, in the growing season, you're here to weed. It sounds simple, almost pleasant, but the reality is brutal. You walk to your husband's strip, where the grain is growing in uneven rows, green and promising, but already besieged by weeds that compete for water and nutrients. Weeds are relentless, opportunistic, and if you don't control them, your harvest suffers. And if your harvest suffers, you go hungry. It's that simple, that stark. You lower yourself to your knees, feeling the damp earth soak through your dress immediately. The ground is never truly dry, even on sunny days, and you'll be kneeling in this wetness for hours. Your knees already carry bruises from yesterday's work, and today's work will deepen them. Layer upon layer of damage that never quite heals. You begin pulling weeds, your fingers working quickly, efficiently, grabbing close to the root and pulling firmly to get the whole plant. Some weeds come up easily, releasing their hold on the earth with barely a tug. Others fight back, their roots spreading deep and wide, requiring real strength to extract. Your fingernails are already broken and blackened with soil. Your hands will be stained green by the end of the day, and no amount of washing will completely remove it. You work your way along the row, pulling, tossing the weeds aside in piles that will later be collected and fed to the animals or composted. The sun climbs higher, and with it comes heat that makes your wool dress feel like a punishment. Sweat runs down your back, pools under your arms, drips from your forehead into your eyes, stinging with salt. You're not alone in the fields. Other women work nearby, their bodies bent in the same posture of labor, their hands performing the same repetitive motions. There's a strange companionship in shared suffering. You can't work side by side and talk. Iseult's family must tend their own strips, but voices carry across the field. Someone makes a joke you can't quite hear, and laughter ripples through the air like wind through grain. Someone else starts a song, an old working song with a simple melody and repetitive verses, and others join in. Voices blending into something that makes the work feel slightly less impossible. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Give us strength to see the day through. Over and over, the words becoming a rhythm, your hands moving in time with the melody. The work is mind-numbing in its repetition. Pull, toss, move forward. Pull, toss, move forward. Your thoughts wander because your body doesn't need your full attention for this. You think about the pottage you left simmering, hoping it won't burn, hoping Margaret remembers to stir it. You think about the bread, whether it baked evenly, whether there will be enough to last until you can make more. You think about your husband, somewhere in another field, guiding a plow behind an ox that belongs to the Lord, breaking earth that will feed the Lord's table before it feeds yours. You think about the taxes due at midnight and whether you'll have enough to pay them, and what happens if you don't. You think about winter, always winter, the specter that haunts every decision, every portion of food, every piece of stored grain. Around mid-morning, you allow yourself to pause, sitting back on your heels and stretching your back as much as your tired muscles will permit. The pain is extraordinary, a deep ache that radiates from your lower spine up through your shoulders. You've been bent over for hours now, and your body is protesting in every language it knows. You look at the work you've completed, several yards of row, now clear of weeds, the grain visible and thriving. Then you look at the work still remaining yards and yards, stretching out before you, seemingly endless. This is the crushing reality of agricultural labor. No matter how much you do, there's always more. The fields don't care about your exhaustion. They don't recognize completion or perfection. They simply demand your time, your strength, your life. Other women are pausing too, taking brief rests, drinking from water skins, wiping sweat from faces. You share a look with Beatrice, working her family's strip 20 feet away. She's younger than you, married only 2 years, already pregnant with her second child. Her belly is just beginning to show, and you wonder how she managed the harvest when she's heavy and awkward, but you already know the answer. She managed because she has to. Women work the fields until the day they give birth. Sometimes giving birth in the fields because labor doesn't wait for convenient moments. You worked until the day before Margaret was born, and you were back in the fields within a week after. Your body torn and bleeding because the work couldn't wait. It never waits. The sun continues its arc across the sky, and the heat intensifies. You've moved through the initial cold of morning into the full warmth of midday, and it's oppressive under your heavy clothing. You can't remove layers. Modesty demands coverage, and besides, the fabric protects your skin from the sun to some degree, though not enough. Your face and hands will be tanned dark by summer's end, marked as someone who labors outdoors, someone of low status. Pale skin is for ladies who stay indoors, who have servants to do their physical work. Your skin tells your story without words. You're thirsty, desperately thirsty, but your water skin is already half empty, and you need to ration what remains. Drinking too much means needing to relieve yourself, which means stopping work, finding a spot away from others, managing your skirts, all while being aware that every moment not working is a moment of judgment. The tedium is broken occasionally by small events. A hare dashes through the field, zigzagging wildly, and someone throws a stone at it but misses. If it had been caught, it would have been a feast. But the Lord's law is clear: game belongs to the Lord, and poaching carries severe punishment. Still, people try, because hunger makes criminals of everyone eventually. A traveling merchant passes on the road that borders the field, his cart loaded with goods you can't afford, and everyone watches him pass with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. Visitors are rare enough to be interesting, and his cart represents a world beyond this village, beyond these fields, a world you'll never see. You watch until he disappears around a bend, then return to your weeding, because what else is there to do? By early afternoon, your hands are bleeding. Small cuts and scrapes have opened on your palms and fingers from the rough weeds and the constant friction. You barely notice anymore. Pain has become background noise, always present but not demanding attention unless it's severe. Your back screams at you every time you shift position. Your knees are numb, which is almost worse than pain, because you can't feel if you're damaging them further. Your shoulders ache from the repetitive motion. Your neck is stiff from bending. There isn't a part of you that doesn't hurt, and you're only halfway through the work that needs doing today. Tomorrow you'll come back and do it again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until the season changes and a different kind of labor takes its place. The social hierarchy is visible even here in the fields. You see the Lord's steward riding through on horseback, inspecting the work, making sure no one is shirking their duties. He's a hard man, known for reporting even minor infractions, and everyone works a little harder when he's watching. He stops to speak with one farmer, and you can't hear the words, but you can see the body language. The farmer deferential, cap in hand, head slightly bowed, the steward upright and commanding, pointing at something with his riding crop. Power dynamics play out in every interaction. The farmer says yes to whatever is being demanded because saying no isn't an option. The steward rides on, satisfied, and the farmer returns to work with slumped shoulders, and you wonder what new burden has just been added to his load. Lunch, when it comes, is sparse and eaten quickly. You sit on the ground, not bothering to find a comfortable spot because there isn't one, and eat a piece of the bread you baked this morning, along with a small piece of hard cheese. The bread is dense and dark, coarse in your mouth, but it's filling and it quiets the worst of your hunger. The cheese is sharp and salty, strong enough to make your eyes water slightly, but it's protein and fat, and your body craves it desperately. You drink sparingly from your water skin, knowing you still have hours of work ahead. Other women eat nearby, similar meals, and the conversation flows more freely now during this sanctioned break. Talk of children, of husbands, of minor village scandals. Who's feuding with whom? Whose cow got into whose garden? Which girl is being courted by which boy? This is the entertainment, the social fabric that makes the hardship bearable. You're all in this together, all suffering the same way, and that shared experience creates bonds stronger than any formal friendship. Agnes sits near you, gnawing on a piece of dried fish that smells like the bottom of a boat. "My daughter's bleeding started," she says casually, and you understand the weight of that statement. Another girl becoming a woman, another potential marriage, another young body that will be bent to the work of survival. "She's only 12, Agnes continues, and there's something in her voice, not quite sadness, not quite resignation, but a recognition of what's coming. 12 is young, but not too young. Girls marry between 12 and 15 usually, 2 boys and men chosen by their families based on practical considerations. Land holdings, labor needs, alliances between families. Love is a luxury, though it sometimes develops after marriage, and you've been fortunate that way. Your husband is not cruel, not given to violence beyond what's normal. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, you feel genuine affection for him. But it wasn't love that brought you together. It was negotiation, contracts, the exchange of goods and promises. The break ends too soon. It always does. You haul yourself to your feet, feeling every year of your age, every hour of labor you've ever performed, and return to the weeding. Your hands move automatically now, your mind drifting into a semi-conscious state where time becomes elastic and strange. Hours pass, or maybe minutes, you can't tell anymore. The sun moves across the sky. The shadows lengthen. Your pile of weeds grows. The row slowly, incrementally, becomes clear. This is meditation through exhaustion, prayer through repetition. Your body is an instrument being played by necessity, and the music it makes is the sound of survival. You are not thinking about fulfillment or purpose or meaning. You're thinking about making it to the end of the day, about having enough energy left to walk home, about whether your feet will carry you one more step, and then another, when the light finally begins to fail. When the sun touches the western horizon and turns the sky colors you're too tired to appreciate, someone calls out that it's time to stop. There's no official end to the workday, just a collective agreement that darkness makes continuing impossible and dangerous. You gather your tools, brush the worst of the dirt from your dress, though it's a futile gesture, and join the slow procession of workers heading back to the village. Everyone moves like the wounded, limping slightly, favoring injuries, holding bodies carefully. This is what labor does. It breaks you down piece by piece, day by day, until there's nothing left but the work itself, until you can't remember ever being anything other than tired. Walking home, you pass the fields you've been working, and in the fading light they look almost beautiful. The grain waves gently in the evening breeze. The earth smells rich and alive. There's a moment, just a moment, where you feel something like pride. You did this. Your hands, your back, your pain created this. These fields will yield grain that will become bread that will feed your children. That's not nothing. That's everything, actually. And as you walk back to your cottage, where more work awaits, where rest is temporary and morning comes too soon, you carry that small spark of satisfaction with you. It won't last. It never does. But for now, for these few steps, it's enough. Midday, a brief pause, and the weight of hunger isn't an emergency here. It's a companion. You learn to move with it, work with it, sleep with it. Some days it whispers. Some days it screams. But it's always there, a constant presence in your belly. A hollowness that never quite fills, a gnawing that never completely stops. The midday meal, such as it is, offers temporary relief, but not satisfaction. Satisfaction is a feeling you remember from childhood, vaguely, or from feast days, when the Lord or the church provides more generous portions. But in the daily rhythm of peasant life, satisfaction is as rare as gold and just as valuable. You've learned to function with hunger the way you've learned to function with pain, by accepting it as normal, by not expecting anything different, by making peace with discomfort as a permanent state of being. You sit on the ground near the edge of the field, your back against a boundary stone that's been there longer than anyone can remember, worn smooth by weather and time. Other women settle near you, forming a loose circle of exhausted bodies, taking their sanctioned rest. The sun is directly overhead now, beating down with the kind of heat that makes everything shimmer slightly, that turns the air thick and hard to breathe. Your dress clings to your body with sweat. and you can smell yourself earth and work, and the particular sharpness of a body pushed to its limits. Everyone smells the same, and after a while you stop noticing. The way you stop noticing the constant low-level discomfort that characterizes every moment of your existence. You reach into the cloth bag you brought with you this morning, feeling inside for the food you packed before dawn, when the day was still full of possibility and your body hadn't yet accumulated hours of damage. Your meal is simple, because simple is all there is. A thick slice of the barley bread you baked, dark and dense, the kind that sits heavy in your stomach and makes you feel full even when the actual nutrition is minimal. You tear off a piece and chew slowly, making it last, feeling the coarse texture of the grain against your teeth. It's not unpleasant, exactly, just monotonous. You've eaten this same bread every day for as long as you can remember, with only slight variations based on what grain is available, what you can afford to grind at the mill. Sometimes there's wheat mixed in, and those loaves are lighter, slightly sweeter. More often, it's pure barley or rye, dark and heavy and filling in the way that cheap food fills with bulk rather than richness. The bread sticks slightly to the roof of your mouth, and you wish you had more water to wash it down. But your skin is already mostly empty, and you need to conserve what remains for the afternoon's work. With the bread, you have a small piece of cheese, hard and aged, the kind that can survive without refrigeration because it's already so dry and salty that spoilage becomes nearly impossible. You cut a sliver with your small knife, the blade worn thin from years of sharpening, and let it sit on your tongue for a moment before chewing. The flavor is sharp and intense, almost overwhelming after the blandness of the bread. Cheese is a luxury in its way, made from milk you got from your neighbor in exchange for eggs from your chickens. Everything in the village operates on this system of barter and exchange. You have what I need, I have what you need, and we trade in a complex web of obligation and reciprocity that everyone understands without it ever being written down. Money exists, you've seen coins occasionally, but most of your economic life happens without currency, through direct exchange and remembered debts that stretch back years. You look at the food remaining in your bag and make a quick calculation, one you make every day without conscious thought. How much can you eat now and still have something for tonight? How much should you save in case tomorrow's work is even harder? If you eat everything now, you'll have more energy for the afternoon's labor, but you'll be desperately hungry by evening. If you save some, you'll be weak this afternoon but have something to look forward to later. There's no right answer, just trade-offs, the constant mathematics of scarcity that governs every decision. You compromise, as you always do, eating most of the bread and cheese, but saving a small piece for later, wrapping it carefully and tucking it back into your bag. This tiny portion represents security, however illusory, the comfort of knowing you have something held in reserve. The other women are eating their own meals, and you can see the variety or lack thereof in what people have. Beatrice has bread and what looks like an onion, which she eats raw, crunching into it with a grimace at the sharpness. Agnes has bread and some kind of dried fish, the smell of which carries even in the open air, pungent and salty. Joan has managed to get a small amount of pottage in a wooden bowl, still warm, and you feel a pang of envy watching her eat it. Seeing the steam rise, imagining the warmth going down her throat. But envy is quickly suppressed. There's no point in wanting what you don't have. And besides, tomorrow your fortunes might be reversed. You might have something she wants, and the cycle continues. This is one of the unspoken rules of survival. Never let jealousy poison the relationships you need. Everyone here is struggling. Everyone is making do with less than enough. Resentment won't fill your belly or ease your labor. Someone produces a jug of ale-weak ale, barely alcoholic, but wet and slightly nourishing, and it gets passed around the circle. When it reaches you, you take a modest sip, feeling the cool liquid soothe your parched throat. The ale tastes of grain and yeast and something vaguely sour, but it's better than water, safer than water, and you're grateful for it. You pass the jug to Agnes, who drinks more deeply, then wipes her mouth with the back of her hand and sighs. "I dream about meat," she says suddenly, and several women laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's true. Meat is a rarity, something you might have a few times a year at Christmas, if you're lucky. At Easter, maybe at a harvest celebration, if the year has been good. Most of your protein comes from peas and beans, from eggs and cheese, occasionally from fish if you live near water or can trade for it. Meat is for the rich, for the Lord's table, for people whose lives you can't imagine. "I had pork once," Beatrice says dreamily, and everyone turns to look at her. "My cousin's wedding. They slaughtered a pig. I remember the tastes so rich I thought I might be sick. But God, it was wonderful." She closes her eyes, as if trying to recapture the memory, and you understand completely. You've had meat maybe 10 times in your life, and each occasion is burned into your memory with perfect clarity. The texture, the flavor, the feeling of fat and juice in your mouth, the sense of eating something substantial, something that satisfies in a way that grain and vegetables never quite do. You could describe every meat meal you've ever eaten, where you were, who you were with, what the occasion was, because they stand out from the monotonous background of your usual diet like stars in a dark sky. The conversation drifts, as it always does, to food. What people wish they could eat, what they remember from better times, what they've heard exists in other places. Someone mentions white bread, the kind made from wheat, so finely ground it's almost like snow, so light it barely has weight. No one here has ever eaten such bread, but everyone has heard of it, and it takes on an almost mythical quality in the telling. Someone else talks about honey, real honey, not the poor substitutes you sometimes make from boiled fruit, but actual honey from bees, golden and sweet and pure. You've tasted it once in your life, a tiny amount given to you when you were sick as a child. And the memory is so vivid you can almost taste it now, decades later. These conversations serve a purpose beyond simple complaint. They're a form of collective dreaming, a way of acknowledging desire while simultaneously accepting that desire will go unfulfilled. If you're enjoying this journey into the past, consider subscribing. It helps me keep creating these bedtime history stories for you. The break is short, perhaps half an hour, no more. Already some of the men are standing, stretching, preparing to return to their labor. The women follow more slowly, bodies reluctant to resume the punishing positions, minds dreading the hours still ahead. You gather your belongings, checking that everything is secure, that nothing has been left behind. You take one more small sip from your water skin, letting the liquid sit in your mouth before swallowing, trying to make it feel like more than it is. Your stomach is no longer actively growling. The bread and cheese have quieted the worst of your hunger. But you're far from full, far from satisfied. You're simply less empty than you were, and that's the best you can hope for on most days. Standing requires conscious effort. Your back has stiffened during the brief rest, and the first few steps are agony as muscles protest being asked to work again. But you move through the pain, as you always do, because stopping isn't an option. Other women are moving too, grimacing, holding their backs, rubbing their knees, but moving nonetheless. There's a strange kind of pride in this, you realize, not pride in the suffering itself, but pride in the endurance, in the stubborn refusal to break, despite everything trying to break you. You're stronger than you look, stronger than you feel. Your body is capable of things that would have seemed impossible before you learned that. Impossible doesn't mean anything when survival depends on doing it anyway. You return to your strip of land and lower yourself once more to your knees. The damp earth soaks through your dress again, cold against your skin despite the warmth of the day. Your hands find weeds automatically, pulling and tossing, resuming the rhythm that was interrupted by the meal. But something is different now. The hunger has quieted, yes, but there's also a heaviness, a lethargy that wasn't there this morning. The food sits in your stomach like a stone, and your body wants desperately to digest, to rest, to sleep. Instead, you're asking it to labor, and it resists in every way it can. Your eyelids feel heavy. Your thoughts become sluggish. The afternoon stretches ahead like an eternity, and you wonder how you'll survive it. This is the curse of the midday meal. It takes away the sharp edge of hunger, but replaces it with exhaustion. You understand intellectually that your body needs fuel to work, that without food you'd be even worse off. But in the moment, with your stomach full and your body desperately wanting to shut down, it's hard to see the benefit. Some of the women around you are swaying slightly as they work, fighting the same battle against fatigue. One older woman, whose name you don't know, actually falls asleep kneeling, her head drooping forward, her hands stilling in the dirt. Someone nudges her awake after a few minutes, and she resumes work with a start, looking around in confusion before memory returns, and she bends back to her task. The afternoon sun is brutal. Morning had cold to fight against, something that kept you alert and moving. But afternoon heat is oppressive, smothering, inescapable. It beats down on your head and shoulders, and even through the fabric of your dress you can feel your skin burning. By evening you'll be red and sore, another layer of damage added to all the previous layers. The Lord's wife, you've heard, stays indoors during the hottest part of the day, rests in cool stone rooms, has servants fan her and bring her drinks. You can't imagine such a life. The closest you come to avoiding the sun is working slightly faster through your tasks so you can finish sooner. But faster work means more exhaustion, and exhaustion has its own price. There's no winning, just different forms of losing. And you choose the option that seems least terrible in the moment. Your thoughts drift to your children, and you wonder how they're managing. Margaret is capable. You've trained her well, but she's still only 7, and the boys are wild and difficult to control. You imagine them running through the cottage, knocking things over, fighting with each other, possibly hurting themselves in ways you won't discover until you return home. But there's nothing you can do from here. You have to trust that your morning instructions were clear enough, that Margaret remembers her responsibilities, that nothing catastrophic will happen in your absence. This is another form of anxiety that women carry constantly, the double burden of physical labor and mental management, of working the fields while simultaneously worrying about home, never being able to fully focus on one because the other always demands attention. The bread in your stomach has settled now, transformed from stone to simple fullness, and you're grateful for it even as you continue working. Hunger will return it, always does, but for these hours you're buffered against it, able to work without your body screaming quite as loudly for nourishment. This is the trade-off, the constant negotiation between immediate needs and future survival. Eat too much now, and you'll have nothing later. Eat too little, and you won't have strength to work. The balance point is different for everyone, shifting based on body type, on workload, on what food is available. And finding it is a skill you've developed through years of practice and mistakes. You've learned to read your own body, to understand its signals, to know the difference between hunger that's dangerous and hunger that's just uncomfortable. This knowledge isn't taught explicitly, it's absorbed through living, through watching other women, through trial and error, through surviving day after day after day in conditions that demand constant adaptation. As the afternoon wears on and the sun begins its slow descent, you allow yourself to think about evening, about returning home, about sitting by the fire with the weight finally off your feet. It's not much to look forward to. There will still be chores, still be children to manage, still be a husband to feed, but it's something, a small light at the end of this particular tunnel. You count the hours by the sun's position, estimating how much longer you need to endure, breaking the time into manageable pieces. Just make it to that tree shadow. Just make it until the sun touches the horizon. Just make it one more hour, and then another, and then you can rest. The promise of rest, even temporary, even incomplete, is enough to keep you moving, keep you pulling weeds, keep you functioning despite every part of you wanting to simply stop, to lie down in the field and let the earth reclaim you. But you don't stop. You never stop, because stopping means failure, and failure means hunger, and hunger means watching your children suffer. So you continue pulling weeds with bleeding hands, your back screaming, your hunger temporarily quieted but never truly gone, just waiting to return. Afternoon, domestic labor and endless tasks. You are never not working. Even when you sit to spin, your hands are moving, your mind is counting, your eyes are watching the children. Rest is a myth told by people who've never had to card wool by candlelight. The afternoon sun is beginning its descent when you finally leave the fields, your body protesting every step of the journey home. The walk that seemed manageable this morning now feels like a pilgrimage, each foot placement requiring conscious decision. Your legs heavy as logs, your back locked into a permanent curve from hours of bending. Other women walk beside you, equally exhausted, and the silence between you is comfortable, born of shared understanding. There are no words for this kind of tired. It lives beyond language, in the realm of pure physical experience. Your cottage appears ahead, small and dark against the late afternoon sky, and despite its humble nature, despite the fact that it represents more work waiting. You feel something like relief at the sight of it. This is yours, the space you manage, the realm where your authority limited, as it is actually means something. You push open the door and step inside, letting your eyes adjust to the dimmer interior light. The fire is still burning, thank God and Margaret both, though it's lower than you'd like. Margaret looks up from where she's been watching the boys, her face tired in a way that makes her look older than her 7 years, and you feel a pang of guilt mixed with pride. She's learning young what it means to be a woman in this world. Learning through doing, through necessity, through having no other choice. How were they? You ask, nodding toward the boys, who are playing with some sticks in the corner, making them fight each other in an imaginary battle. Margaret shrugs, a gesture she's learned from watching you, a gesture that says everything and nothing. John tried to go outside alone. I stopped him. Thomas cried for a while, but I gave him some bread, and he stopped. Her report is efficient, practical, and you nod approval. She's done well, kept them safe, kept them fed, kept the fire alive. These are the essential tasks, and she's managed them all. You touch her head gently, a brief gesture of affection that's all you can spare before turning to the endless list of tasks that await your attention. The pot over the fire still contains pottage from this morning, though it's thickened considerably, almost solid now from hours of slow cooking. You stir it with your wooden spoon, scraping the bottom to make sure nothing has burned and stuck. The smell is familiar, comforting in its way. Grain and vegetables cooked together until they're barely distinguishable from each other, everything merging into one unified mass of sustenance. This will be dinner for your family, supplemented by the bread, if there's any left, by whatever else you can scrape together. You taste it, checking the seasoning, adding a pinch of salt from your precious supply, a few dried herbs from the bundles hanging overhead. Salt is expensive, bought or traded for with great care, and you use it sparingly, measuring each grain against your family's needs. But there's no time to focus on cooking alone. Domestic labor is a series of overlapping tasks, each demanding attention, none ever truly complete. You move from the pot to your spinning wheel, a wooden contraption that sits in the corner, worn smooth by use. Beside it sits a basket of carded wool, prepared during previous evenings, waiting to be transformed into thread. You settle onto the low stool, feeling your back protest the new position, even though it's a relief to sit. Your feet find the treadle automatically, and your hands reach for the wool, teasing out a length of fiber, attaching it to the spindle. The wheel begins to turn, the familiar rhythm taking over, and the wool twists and elongates, becoming thread under your practiced hands. This is skilled work, though no one would ever call it that. Spinning requires judgment, feel, experience. Too much twist and the thread becomes brittle and breaks. Too little and it falls apart when woven. The thickness must be consistent, the tension even, and your hands have learned through thousands of hours how to achieve this without conscious thought. You spin and watch the thread accumulate on the spindle, knowing that this thread will eventually become cloth, and that cloth will become clothing for your family, or it will be traded for something else you need. Nothing you produce is wasted. Every moment of labor translates directly into survival in some form. The wool came from sheep you don't own, processed by hands that are yours and others in the village. part of the communal labor that binds everyone together in a web of mutual dependence. Margaret sits beside you without being asked, picking up the handcards, 2 wooden paddles studded with metal teeth, and begins preparing more wool for spinning. She works the cards against each other, pulling the wool fibers into alignment, creating the fluffy rolls that you'll spin. Her technique isn't perfect, yet she pulls too hard sometimes, tears the fibers, but she's learning, getting better every time. In a few years, she'll be as proficient as you are, and she'll teach her own daughters the same way. The knowledge passing down through generations of women's hands, preserved not in books or formal instruction, but in muscle memory and observation. You work side by side in companionable silence. The only sounds, the creaking of the spinning wheel, the soft whisper of wool being carded, the occasional shout from the boys playing their games. The afternoon light slants through your small window, casting long shadows across the earthen floor, and you track the passage of time by these shadows, by the changing quality of light, by the internal clock that tells you when tasks need to shift. Soon you'll need to check on the animals. The chickens need to be secured before dusk, protected from foxes and other predators. The goat needs water and a bit of grain, if you can spare it. These animals are assets, valuable beyond measure, and their care cannot be neglected, no matter how tired you are. The chickens provide eggs, trading currency, more reliable than coin, and occasionally meat when a hen stops laying. The goat provides milk that becomes cheese, and her presence during winter adds warmth to the cottage. Losing any of these animals would be a disaster, so they receive attention even when you have no attention left to give. You set aside your spinning and move to the small attached shed where the animals are kept. It's dark and pungent, smelling of animal bodies and old straw and manure. The chickens cluck and flutter as you enter, disturbed by your presence. And you check their nesting boxes quickly, finding 2 eggs, small but precious. You slip them into your apron pocket carefully, already planning how to use them, one for breakfast tomorrow, one to trade perhaps, or both saved for baking if you can manage it. The goat regards you with her strange rectangular pupils, chewing cud placidly, and you scratch behind her ears briefly before checking her water. The bucket is nearly empty, and you make a mental note to refill it, adding yet another task to the list that never ends. Outside, you tend to your small garden plot, a patch of earth behind the cottage where you grow vegetables for your family's use. Onions, cabbage, peas, herbs for cooking, and medicine, everything carefully tended, weeded, watered when possible. This garden is entirely your domain, your responsibility. And what it produces belongs to your household before any lord or church takes their share. You pull a few weeds that have sprung up since yesterday, check the cabbage for the worms that love to eat it, tie up a bean plant that's threatening to topple. The garden is small, barely 10 feet by 10 feet, but it's intensively used. Every inch planned and planted, succession crops, ensuring that as one thing finishes, another is ready to take its place. This knowledge of gardening, of seasons and timing and companion planting, is another form of women's wisdom, passed down and accumulated over generations, refined through observation and necessity. Back inside, you return to your spinning, but your mind is already moving ahead to the next tasks. Bread needs to be prepared for tomorrow, dough mixed and left to rise overnight. Clothes need mending, particularly your husband's work tunic, which has developed a tear that will become a disaster if not addressed soon. The floor needs sweeping, though you've swept it yesterday and will sweep it again tomorrow in an endless cycle of temporary cleanliness. The boys need to be fed and washed, or at least have the worst of the dirt removed from their faces and hands. Your husband will return soon from the fields, hungry and exhausted, expecting food and basic comfort. And providing these things is your responsibility, your contribution to the household's survival. Margaret brings you one of the boys' tunics, a small garment that's more whole than fabric at this point. Can you fix it? She asks, and you examine it, turning it over in your hands, assessing the damage. The fabric is worn thin everywhere, patched multiple times already, and you're not sure there's enough sound material left to work with. But throwing it away isn't an option. Cloth is too valuable, too labor-intensive to produce. So you'll patch it again, cutting a piece from an even more ruined garment, stitching it in place with thread you've spun yourself, extending its life for a few more months until it's literally impossible to repair further. Then you'll cut it down for rags, and those rags will eventually be composted or burned. Every bit of material used until there's absolutely nothing left. This is the economy of poverty, where nothing can be wasted, where every item must serve multiple purposes across its lifetime. You thread a needle iron, precious, carefully guarded with woolen thread, your hands working automatically while your mind wanders. Your fingers are calloused enough that the needle rarely draws blood anymore, though occasionally you miscalculate and prick yourself, a small, sharp pain that you barely register. The stitching doesn't need to be beautiful, just functional, holding the patch in place against the abuse that children inflict on clothing through normal use. You work by the light from the fire and the fading afternoon sun, knowing that soon you'll be working by firelight alone, straining your eyes in the dim, flickering illumination, probably damaging your vision, though you won't understand that in those terms. Many women your age already have trouble seeing close work, their eyes worn out from years of laboring in poor light. Another price paid for survival. The door opens and your husband enters, his face gray with exhaustion, his clothes covered in field dirt, his hands cracked and bleeding from handling rough tools all day. He nods to you, a greeting that contains fatigue and acknowledgement and expectation all at once, and you set aside your mending to serve him. This is the dance of marriage in your world. He provides physical labor and protection. You provide food and domestic management, and together you create something barely stable enough to call a life. He sits heavily on the bench, and you bring him ale in a wooden cup, then a bowl of the pottage, thick enough now that the spoon almost stands upright in it. He eats without speaking, shoveling food into his mouth with the efficiency of someone who sees eating as fuel rather than pleasure. And you're grateful for his silence because you're too tired for conversation anyway while he eats. You're already moving to the next task, taking the bucket to fetch more water from the well because the morning's supply is long gone, used for cooking and drinking and the minimal washing you've managed. The walk to the well and back with a full bucket is just one more physical burden added to all the others. Your arms straining water sloshing onto your dress. But you make the journey because it's necessary. Because tomorrow you'll need water again. Because the tasks never end and stopping means failure. Other women are at the well too, the evening gathering, and you exchange brief words, sharing news and complaints and small jokes that make the burden lighter, at least emotionally, if not physically. This community of women is your support system, the only one you have. And these brief interactions are sometimes the only thing that keeps you sane back home. You organize the final tasks of the evening. The boys need to be prepared for bed, their faces wiped with a damp cloth, their bladders emptied one last time. Margaret is already half asleep by the fire, her small body giving in to exhaustion, and you guide her to the bed gently, helping her lie down, covering her with the blanket. Your husband has finished eating and is sitting silently, staring into the fire with eyes that see nothing, lost in his own fatigue. You clean the bowls and spoons with sand and a rag, getting them reasonably clean without wasting water, then set them aside for tomorrow. You check the fire one last time, banking it carefully, burying coals under ash so they'll survive until morning. Because starting a fire from nothing is difficult and time-consuming, and you can't afford to do it every day. The pottage pot still has food remaining, enough for tomorrow if you're careful with portions. And you cover it with a cloth to protect it from insects and dust. You take a moment to stand in the center of your cottage, looking around at the space you maintain, and allow yourself to feel something like satisfaction. The fire is burning. The children are safe. There's food for tomorrow. The animals are secured. The most urgent tasks are complete. This is success in your world, measured not in wealth or status, but in the continuation of life itself, in making it through another day without disaster. Your back aches with an intensity that makes you want to weep. Your hands are raw and bleeding. Your feet throb with each heartbeat, but you're alive. Your family is alive. And tomorrow you'll wake before dawn and do it all again. You sit for just a moment on the edge of the bed, and Margaret stirs beside you, murmuring something incomprehensible in her sleep. You smooth her hair back from her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that you rarely have time for during waking hours. And you think about the life she's inheriting. The same life you inherited, the same life your mother lived and your grandmother before her. An endless cycle of labor, of exhaustion, of making do with less than enough. Part of you hopes for something better for her, though you can't imagine what that would look like. Mostly, you just hope she'll be strong enough to endure, because endurance is all you have to offer her. All you can teach her, all that matters in the end. The domestic labor of a peasant woman is invisible to history, never recorded, never celebrated, but it's the foundation of everything, the work that keeps families fed, children raised, households functioning. Without it, the entire structure collapses. And you carry that weight every day, not because you're heroic or special, but because there's no one else to carry it, and the alternative is unthinkable. Evening, twilight, community, and small comforts. This is the only time you're not measured by your labor. In the firelight, with your children sleeping and your husband quiet beside you, you can almost forget that tomorrow will be exactly the same. Almost. The evening settles over the village like a blanket. Not comfortable exactly, but familiar. wrapping everything in darkness and the small pools of light that leak from cottage doorways. The quality of air changes as night approaches, cooler, damper, carrying the smell of wood smoke from dozens of hearths, the distant sound of animals settling, the village itself exhaling after the exertion of another day. You've completed the most urgent tasks, the ones that can't be delayed, and now you exist in this strange liminal space, where exhaustion has become so complete it almost transforms into a kind of peace. Your husband sits on the bench near the fire, working on a broken tool handle, trying to repair it before tomorrow because tools are expensive and his labor depends on having functional equipment. His hands move slowly, carefully, whittling new wood to fit the iron head of a hoe that's lost its handle. He doesn't speak, and you don't expect him to. Men and women occupy different worlds in many ways, coming together for specific purposes: procreation, economic cooperation, the basic functions of household management, but living largely separate emotional lives. You don't resent this particularly. It's simply how things are, how they've always been, and you've never known any different arrangement to compare it to. Sometimes you wonder what he thinks about, whether he dreams of a different life, whether he carries the same bone-deep exhaustion that you do. But you never ask, and he never volunteers. The silence between you is comfortable in its predictability. Margaret and the boys are asleep in the bed, their small bodies curled together for warmth, their breathing soft and even. You've checked on them twice already, an impulse you can't quite explain, just needing to see them safe and still. They're the reason for everything, the purpose behind every task, every hour of labor, every compromise and sacrifice. Without them, you might give up, might let the exhaustion win, but their existence demands your continuation, and so you continue. You watch them sleep and feel something fierce and protective rise in your chest, something almost painful in its intensity. They're so small, so vulnerable, so completely dependent on you and their father to keep them alive in a world that's indifferent to their survival. The responsibility is crushing and sacred all at once. A soft knock on your door breaks the evening quiet, and you open it to find Beatrice standing there, her shawl wrapped tightly against the cooling air, her face illuminated by the small oil lamp she carries. "Can you spare a moment?" she asks, and you nod, stepping outside and pulling the door closed behind you so the conversation won't disturb the sleepers. This is common in the village, these evening visits between women, brief moments of connection and community that happen in the spaces between obligations. You and Beatrice walk a short distance from your cottage, far enough that your voices won't carry, but close enough that you can still see your door, still respond if needed. The night air is cool on your face, refreshing after the close warmth of the cottage, and you breathe it in deeply, feeling it clear your head slightly. "I'm frightened," Beatrice says quietly, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly, where the new life is growing. "The last birth nearly killed me. I don't know if I can survive another." Startling and familiar all at once. Birth is dangerous, the most dangerous thing most women will ever do, and everyone knows someone who died that way, bleeding out, infection setting in, the baby stuck, and both mother and child lost. You've been fortunate with your 3 living children, though you lost 2, and you don't know whether that fortune will continue if you conceive again. Your bleeding is still regular, which means pregnancy remains possible, remains a constant possibility every time your husband reaches for you in the darkness. There's no reliable way to prevent it, no control over your own body's fertility, just prayer and hope and occasionally old women's wisdom about herbs that might help but might also poison you. You take Beatrice's hand, squeezing it gently. You're strong, you tell her, though you're not sure strength is what matters when childbirth goes wrong. The midwife is skilled. You'll have women with you. These are the comforts you can offer, the only ones that exist. There are no doctors for people like you. No medical interventions beyond what the village midwife knows from experience and tradition. When women die in childbirth, as they regularly do, it's accepted as God's will, as the price of Eve's sin, as simply the way things are. But acceptance doesn't make it less terrifying. And you see that terror in Beatrice's eyes, a mirror of fears you've felt yourself. I'll be there with you, you add, and this promise seems to help more than the empty reassurances. Community is what saves you, over and over, the knowledge that you're not alone in the suffering, that other women understand and will hold your hand through the worst of it. You talk for a while longer, about small things and large things, about whose daughter is being courted, about the harvest prospects, about the new family that's moved into the village from somewhere else, bringing strange customs and unfamiliar accents. Gossip is entertainment and information both, the social glue that holds the community together, and it flows between women like water, carrying news and judgment and connection. Eventually, Beatrice says she needs to return home, and you embrace briefly, awkwardly, neither of you comfortable with physical affection, but needing it nonetheless. You watch her walk back to her cottage, her lamp bobbing in the darkness, and you feel the loneliness of your existence settle over you again like frost. Everyone is alone, ultimately, locked inside their own bodies, their own experiences. But these brief connections make the loneliness bearable, make you feel part of something larger than your individual suffering. Back inside, you find your husband has finished his repairs and is sitting by the fire, staring into the flames with an expression you can't read. You settle onto the floor near him, close enough to share warmth, but not touching, and for a few minutes you simply exist together in silence. The fire crackles and pops, sending occasional sparks upward, and you watch them drift and die, tiny, brief lives that mirror your own in some way. Hard day, he asks, eventually, and you almost laugh at the understatement. Every day is hard. The question is really asking whether it was worse than usual, whether something went wrong beyond the normal catalog of difficulties. You shake your head. No worse than any other, you say, and he nods, accepting this, and the silence returns. This is intimacy in your marriage, not passionate declarations or deep conversations, but shared exhaustion, mutual understanding that words can't capture. You know he worked as hard as you did today, that his body hurts as much as yours, that tomorrow he'll wake and do it again just as you will. There's a partnership in this, a strange equality born of shared suffering, even though the law and the church and society all say you're inferior, property essentially, subject to his authority. In practice, your work is as essential as his, your decisions as important to the household's survival, your labor as back. You're a team grinding against the stone of existence. And if there's not love in the romantic sense, there's at least respect, at least recognition of each other's value. The fire is dying down, and you need to decide whether to add more fuel or let it burn lower for the night. Fuel is always a consideration, always a calculation of resources against needs. You decide to add one more log, enough to keep some warmth through the early evening, but not so much that you're wasting wood you'll need later. The log catches quickly, flames wrapping around it, and the light in the cottage brightens briefly before settling into a steady glow. Your husband stands, stretching, joints popping audibly, and begins preparing for bed. There's no separate sleeping area, no privacy, just the one bed that everyone shares, bodies pressed together for warmth, and you follow his lead, beginning your own minimal preparations. You step outside briefly for one final task, walking to the privy pit at the edge of your property, a hole in the ground with a wooden seat over it, smelling exactly as awful as you'd expect. The night is fully dark now, the sky scattered with stars, so numerous they look like spilled salt, beautiful in a way you don't have time to appreciate, but notice anyway. The moon is rising, not quite full, casting pale light over the sleeping village. You can see other cottages, dark shapes, with the occasional glow of firelight through gaps in walls. And you know that behind each door is another family much like yours, another woman as tired as you are, another collection of lives barely held together by labor and will. This knowledge is oddly comforting. You're not unique in your suffering, not singled out by fate or God for particular hardship. Everyone struggles, everyone endures, and somehow, through collective stubbornness, life continues. Back inside, you perform your evening prayers, kneeling by the fire with your husband, speaking the words you've memorized since childhood, asking God for protection through the night, for daily bread, for forgiveness of sins, for mercy. The prayers are rote, mechanical, but there's comfort in the ritual, in the repetition, in the belief, however distant, it sometimes feels that someone is listening, that your suffering has meaning, that endurance will be rewarded eventually. If not in this life, then in the next. The promise of heaven is what makes earth bearable, the distant hope of rest, of peace, of a place where hunger doesn't exist and labor isn't necessary and bodies don't hurt. You're not sure you believe it completely, but you need to believe it, and so you do, clinging to faith the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. You slide into bed carefully, trying not to disturb the children, and your husband follows, the bed frame creaking under the combined weight. The mattress is thin and lumpy, the blanket insufficient against the cold that will deepen as the night progresses. But it's still better than the ground, still a form of shelter and safety. Your body relaxes incrementally, muscles slowly releasing the tension they've held all day, and the pain that's been your constant companion becomes somehow more bearable in the horizontal position. You're not comfortable. Comfort is too much to expect, but you're no longer actively working, and that alone feels like victory. Margaret stirs beside you, her small hand finding yours in the darkness, holding on, and you squeeze back gently. This wordless communication, meaning more than any speech could convey. Your husband's breathing deepens and slows. Almost immediately, he's one of those people who falls asleep easily, escaping consciousness within minutes of lying down. You envy this ability, while simultaneously being glad that at least one of you can rest easily. Your own mind is slower to quiet, still running through tomorrow's tasks, still worrying about things you can't control, still processing the events of the day. You think about the weeds you pulled, the thread you spun, the bread you need to make tomorrow, the eggs you found, Beatrice's fear, your children's futures, your own aging body, the endless cycle of work and worry that constitutes your existence. But gradually, slowly, exhaustion wins over anxiety, and your thoughts become less coherent, more dreamlike, drifting into fragments and images that don't quite make sense. The last thing you're aware of before sleep takes you is the sound of the fire settling, a soft collapse of burning wood, and the feeling of warmth on your face despite the cold air everywhere else. You're alive. You survived another day. Tomorrow you'll wake before dawn and do it all again, but that's tomorrow's problem. For now, for these few hours of darkness, you can rest. Not peacefully. There's no peace in a life like yours, but completely, deeply. The kind of sleep that comes from utter exhaustion, from a body that simply cannot continue without shutting down. And in the morning, when the cold wakes you and the cycle begins again, you'll find the strength somehow to rise, to move, to continue, because you always do, because you have to, because this is life, and stopping means death, and you're not ready for that yet. Not while your children still need you, not while there's still breath in your body and work for your hands. Not yet. Night, sleep, dreams, and the cycle continual wake again before dawn. Your hands will ache, your back will protest, and you'll do it all again, because this is life. Not the life of queens or saints, but the life of millions of women whose names will never know, women who built the world with their bare, calloused hands. Sleep, when it comes, is not gentle. It's more like falling into a well, a sudden plunge into darkness so complete that you cease to exist for a while. Your consciousness simply switching off like a candle being snuffed. There's no gradual drift, no peaceful transition from waking to dreaming. Your body is so exhausted that it simply shuts down the moment it's given permission. The moment you stop demanding it perform. The moment horizontal stillness is allowed. This is the sleep of laborers, of people pushed past their limits every single day. And it's both blessing and curse blessing because it comes quickly and completely. Curse because it's never quite enough, never truly restorative. Just a brief pause before the whole terrible process begins again. The cottage at night is its own world, separate from the day. Sounds that go unnoticed in the busy hours become pronounced in the darkness, the creak of settling wood, the rustle of mice in the thatch overhead, the breathing of 5 people, and occasionally the goat through the thin wall separating animal from human space. The fire has burned down to embers now, just a faint red glow that provides no real light but holds the promise of morning's flame, and the temperature drops steadily as the night progresses. You've piled the single blanket over everyone, but it's not enough. It's never enough, and you all press together instinctively, sharing body heat, creating a small pocket of warmth in the center while the edges remain painfully cold. Your feet are ice despite being tucked under the blanket, and you curl them up toward your body, seeking any additional warmth you can find. Dreams, when they come, are strange and fragmented. mixing memory with imagination, with anxiety, in ways that make no logical sense but feel intensely real in the moment. You dream of endless fields stretching to the horizon, your hands pulling weeds that multiply faster than you can remove them, growing back the moment you move past them, an infinite task that can never be completed. You dream of bread, mountains of it, white and soft and warm, and you're eating and eating, but never feeling full, the bread turning to ash in your mouth. You dream of your mother, dead these 5 years, sitting by your fire and speaking in a voice you've almost forgotten, telling you something important, something you desperately need to remember. But when you wake, you can't recall a single word. You dream of being young again, a child before responsibility, running through summer grass with nothing expected of you, the sun warm on your face. And this dream is the cruelest, because waking from it means returning to the reality of what you've become. Sometimes you half wake during the night, surfacing from deep sleep into a confused state where you're not entirely sure where you are or what year it is. These moments of disorientation are frightening in their way, your mind struggling to piece together identity and circumstance. And you lie there, breathing in the darkness, waiting for memory to return, for the weight of your life to settle back onto your shoulders. You hear one of the boys whimper in his sleep, probably dreaming something equally unsettling, and you reach out to touch him, your hand finding his small back, rubbing gentle circles until he settles again. This maternal instinct operates even when you're barely conscious, a reflex deeper than thought. And you drift back toward sleep with your hand still resting on your child, tethering both of you to safety. The night is when fears grow largest, when the anxieties you can suppress during the busy day come rushing back with amplified intensity. Lying in the darkness, you worry about harvests failing, about illness sweeping through the village, about your husband being injured and unable to work, about any of the 1,000 disasters that could destroy the precarious stability you've built. You worry about your children. Will they survive to adulthood? Will Margaret find a decent husband? Will the boys be strong enough for the life that awaits them? You worry about yourself, about your aging body, about what happens when you can no longer work as hard as you do now, when your back finally gives out completely, or your hands become too crippled with joint pain to spin, or your eyes fail from years of straining in poor light. There's no safety net, no retirement, no pension. You work until you can't, and then you become a burden on your children if they can afford to support you, or you die. Those are the options, and neither is particularly appealing. But the night also brings a strange kind of freedom, a release from the constant observation and judgment that characterizes daylight hours. Here in the darkness, no one can see you. No one is measuring your worth by your productivity. No one is comparing your labor to someone else's. You exist purely as yourself, not as worker or mother or wife, but just as a consciousness floating in the void. And there's something almost peaceful about this anonymity. You can think thoughts you'd never voice aloud, can imagine lives you'll never live, can be angry or sad or resentful without those emotions having to be managed or suppressed for the sake of social cohesion. The night is yours in a way that the day never is, even if your ownership of it is limited to these brief hours of semi-consciousness. Outside, the village sleeps. Occasionally, you hear a dog bark, the sound carrying clearly in the still air, or the cry of a night-bird hunting, or the distant sound of someone coughing in another cottage, the sound of illness, or just the chronic respiratory problems that come from breathing smoke every day. The village at night feels both safer and more dangerous than during the day. Safer, contained, accounted for, but more dangerous because darkness hides threats, makes the familiar landscape strange and potentially menacing. Stories circulate constantly about night travelers, about things that walk after dark, about spirits and demons and all manner of supernatural dangers. You don't know what you believe about such things, but you're glad to be inside, behind a closed door, surrounded by your family, rather than out there in the darkness alone. The boundary between sleeping and waking becomes increasingly porous as the night progresses and morning approaches. You drift in and out, half aware, your mind wandering through memories and worries and fragments of dreams that feel more real than reality. You're never fully asleep during these hours, never fully awake either, existing in some intermediate state where the line between conscious and unconscious blurs into irrelevance. Your body knows it needs to wake soon, knows dawn is approaching, even without being able to see the sky, and it begins preparing itself reluctantly, incrementally, muscles tensing slightly, awareness sharpening, the protective blankness of deep sleep giving way to the emerging consciousness of a new day beginning. And then, before you're ready, before you've had anything close to enough rest, the cold returns with sharp intensity. The fire has died completely now, just cold ash and the faintest warmth memory, and the temperature in the cottage has dropped to nearly match the outside air. This is what wakes you fully, not light, not sound, but cold, so complete it feels aggressive, biting at your face and hands, the only parts of you not buried under blanket and bodies. You lie there for a moment, eyes still closed, trying to deny the reality of waking, trying to steal a few more seconds of not responsibility, but it's futile. You're awake now, fully and completely, and the day is waiting, indifferent to whether you're ready for it. You open your eyes to complete darkness, or near enough. There's the faintest gray beginning to show through the cracks around the door. The promise of dawn, still an hour or more away, but present, inevitable. Your body catalogs its complaints immediately: back pain, joint stiffness, the persistent ache in your shoulders, the numbness in your feet from cold, the dryness in your mouth, the pressure in your bladder that will soon require attention. But underneath all these specific discomforts is the larger reality of exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness that sleep hasn't really addressed, just temporarily suppressed. You're tired in a way that feels permanent, a tiredness that rest can't cure, because it comes not from one day's work, but from years of accumulated labor, from a life lived without pause or relief. This is what it means to be a peasant woman in medieval times, to be perpetually exhausted, perpetually sore, perpetually struggling, with no prospect of change and no expectation that things should or could be different. The cycle is beginning again. You'll need to slip from the bed without waking the others, rekindle the fire, fetch water, begin preparing food, check the animals, and launch into another day identical to yesterday and the day before that and all the days, stretching back through your life and forward through whatever years remain to you. The monotony is crushing sometimes, the knowledge that this is all there is and all there ever will be. That your life has already played out in its essential form, and what remains is just repetition. Variations on the same themes of work and survival until your body, finally, breaks or disease takes you, or childbirth claims you, or simply the accumulated damage of living this way becomes too much, and you slip away as quietly as you arrived, leaving barely a mark on the world. But here's the strange thing lying there in the darkness, cold and sore and tired beyond measure. You find within yourself a small core of something that might be called resilience, or might just be stubbornness. You're not ready to quit, despite everything, despite the pain and the monotony and the complete absence of anything that modern people would call quality of life. Some part of you wants to continue, wants to see your children grow, wants to spin more thread and bake more bread and pull more weeds and live more days. It's not happiness, not contentment, not anything positive. Really, it's just the fundamental life force that keeps organisms struggling against entropy. The biological imperative to persist even when persistence seems pointless. You're alive, and alive wants to stay alive, regardless of the conditions in which that life must be lived. You begin to move, carefully extracting yourself from the tangle of sleeping bodies, feeling the cold air hit you fully as you leave the shared warmth of the bed. Your feet touch the earthen floor, and the cold shoots up your legs. But you're moving now, already reaching for your dress, already beginning the sequence of actions that will launch you into the day. Behind you, the children sleep on Margaret's face, peaceful in the dim pre-dawn light. The boys curled together like puppies, your husband breathing deeply, still claimed by sleep for a little longer. In a few minutes, you'll wake them. But for now, they're safe, warm, resting. And you can give them these few extra minutes of peace before the demands of the day begin for them too. The hearth awaits your attention. You kneel before it, your knees protesting the familiar position, and begin searching through the ash for any surviving ember, any spark of life that can be coaxed back into flame. Your hands work automatically, movements perfected through thousands of repetitions. And you don't think about what you're doing, you just do it. Because this is what you do, what you've always done, what you'll continue doing until you can't anymore. This is your life. This is the life of a medieval peasant woman, unrecorded, unremembered, uncelebrated, but absolutely essential. The invisible foundation upon which everything else rests. You are one woman among millions, living one day among thousands, performing tasks that will never be noted in any chronicle or history. And yet, without you and women like you, civilization itself would collapse. The bread would go unbaked. The children would go unfed. The cloth would remain unwoven. The work that makes life possible would simply not get done. You find an ember, still red, still holding heat, and you breathe on it, gently, adding kindling, watching it catch. The flame grows small at first, but strengthening, pushing back the darkness, beginning to warm the cold air. And as the fire comes to life, as light returns to your cottage, as another day begins its inexorable unfolding, you think about the millions of women who've done exactly this, who've risen before dawn to kindle fires and begin the endless work, women stretching back through centuries, your mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers in an unbroken chain of labor and endurance. You're not alone, not really. You're part of something vast and ancient, a sisterhood of suffering and strength that spans all of human history. That thought doesn't make the work easier, doesn't reduce the pain or eliminate the exhaustion, but it gives it context, meaning, perhaps, or at least the comfort of shared experience. You are doing what women have always done, and tomorrow, if you're fortunate enough to see it, you'll do it all again. Epilogue. The reality behind the romance-optional, reflective close. These women didn't write books. They didn't leave portraits. But they left us their descendants, their legacy. Every time you bake bread, mend clothes, or simply endure a hard day, you're echoing them across the centuries. We've spent a day together now, you and I, walking through the life of a medieval peasant woman, inhabiting her body, feeling her exhaustion, understanding as much as any modern person can the weight of existence in 1347. It's been uncomfortable, hasn't it? The cold, the hunger, the relentless labor, the complete absence of anything resembling leisure or comfort or choice. Everything we take for granted, hot water from a tap, food from a refrigerator, light at the flip of a switch, medicine for pain, rest when we're tired, none of that existed for her. And yet she lived, she functioned, she continued, day after day, year after year, because she had no alternative. This wasn't a temporary hardship to endure. It was simply life, the only life she knew. And she probably never even imagined that life could be different. Let's step back now, gently, from the immersive narrative and look at the historical reality of what we've just experienced together. Medieval peasant women, who made up the vast majority of the female population in Europe during this period, lived lives of extraordinary hardship by any modern standard. Life expectancy was somewhere in the low to mid-30s, though if you survived childhood and childbirth, you might make it into your 50s or even 60s. But those numbers don't tell the full story. Don't convey what it meant to live in a body that was constantly breaking down from overwork, inadequate nutrition, repeated pregnancies, and complete absence of medical care. These women's bodies were tools used until they broke, and there was no concept of preserving health or preventing injury or managing chronic pain. You worked until you couldn't. And then, if you were lucky, your children took care of you, and if you weren't, you died cold and hungry and alone. Infant mortality was devastating. Estimates suggest that anywhere from 20 to 30% of children died before their first birthday, and up to 50% died before age 5. Every woman knew the grief of losing a child, often multiple children. Pregnancy and childbirth were incredibly dangerous. Perhaps 1 to 2% of women died in childbirth with each pregnancy, which sounds small until you realize that women typically went through 5 to 8 pregnancies in their lifetimes, meaning the cumulative risk was substantial. Dying in childbirth was common enough that women routinely made preparations before giving birth, putting their affairs in order, making peace with family members, essentially treating each birth as a potential death sentence. And those who survived childbirth often suffered permanent damage, prolapsed uterus, fistulas, chronic pain, complications that made subsequent labor even more dangerous and daily life more difficult. The work we've described, the fieldwork, the domestic labor, the constant grinding struggle for survival, this wasn't exaggerated for dramatic effect. This was reality. Archaeological evidence shows that medieval peasant skeletons bear markers of extreme physical stress, compressed vertebrae from carrying heavy loads, arthritic joints from repetitive motion, evidence of nutritional deficiency, signs of chronic infection. Their teeth tell stories of poor diet and no dental care. Their bones reveal injuries healed poorly or not at all. These were bodies used hard and discarded when they broke. Bodies that were valuable only for what they could produce, not for any intrinsic worth or dignity. And women's bodies were used even harder than men's in some ways, because in addition to the agricultural labor they shared with men, women also carried the entire burden of reproduction, of domestic management, of child rearing, with none of the legal rights or social power that men possessed. The legal status of women in medieval Europe was somewhere between that of children and property. A woman was under the legal authority of her father until marriage, then under the authority of her husband. She couldn't own property independently in most circumstances, couldn't make legal contracts, couldn't represent herself in court. If she was widowed, she might gain some independence, but only if she had sons old enough to manage affairs, and even then her position was precarious. The idealized version of medieval life that sometimes appears in popular culture, the chivalry, the courtly love, the romance that was a fantasy of the aristocracy, applying to perhaps 1% of the population. For the peasant woman we've been following, there was no chivalry, no courtly love, no knights in shining armor. There was just work, pregnancy, pain, and the constant proximity of death. And yet, and this is important, these women were not simply victims, not passive recipients of suffering. They developed incredible survival skills, accumulated and passed down knowledge that kept their families alive, created community structures of mutual support that were sophisticated and effective. The networks of women we've glimpsed gathering at the well, helping with childbirth, sharing food in hard times, teaching daughters their crafts. These were systems of resistance against a world that was trying to crush them. They found joy in small things, celebrated what they could, loved their children fiercely, maintained dignity in circumstances that offered no dignity. They were fully human, fully complex, capable of laughter and anger and hope and despair. Not saints and not simple sufferers, but people trying to live as fully as their circumstances allowed. The economic value of women's labor, though never officially recognized or compensated, was absolutely crucial to medieval society's functioning. Historians have calculated that women's unpaid domestic labor, spinning, weaving, food preparation, childcare, animal husbandry, garden management represented a substantial portion of the economy, perhaps as much as a third of total productive value. Without this labor, the medieval economy would have collapsed. But because it happened in the private sphere, because it wasn't paid in currency, because it was done by women, it was invisible to official record-keeping and wasn't counted as real work. This erasure continues to affect how we understand medieval life. Most historical sources focus on men's activities, on warfare and politics and commerce, while women's contributions simply don't appear, creating the false impression that women did little or contributed less. The reality is that women worked harder and longer than men in many cases. They just did different work, work that didn't get written down or preserved. There's debate among historians about whether the medieval period was particularly bad for women or whether It was simply bad for everyone who wasn't wealthy and powerful. Some argue that earlier periods or later periods offered women more autonomy, more opportunity, better conditions. Others suggest that the variation was enormous, depending on region, time period, social class, individual circumstances, and that making broad generalizations is difficult. What's clear is that the peasant woman's life we've explored today, while specific in its details, 1347, England represents a pattern that repeated across centuries and across much of the world. Women working without recognition, suffering without complaint, surviving against odds that should have been insurmountable, and being largely forgotten by history because their contributions weren't valued enough to record the Black Death, which would arrive in England the following year in 1348, would append much of this system. The plague killed perhaps 30 to 50% of the population, creating severe labor shortages that paradoxically improved conditions for surviving peasants. When workers became scarce, they could demand better treatment, higher wages, more freedom. Some women found expanded opportunities in the post-plague economy, taking on roles that had been closed to them before. But this improvement came at an unimaginable cost, purchased with mass death and social collapse. And the underlying structure of women's subordination remained largely intact, even as specific circumstances shifted. The fundamental pattern: women working without recognition, bearing children without support, surviving without rights, would continue for centuries more, evolving but never fully disappearing. As you lie here now, listening to this story in comfort that the medieval woman could never have imagined, it's worth reflecting on the distance we've traveled and the debt we owe. Every material comfort you possess, every right you enjoy, every choice you make freely was purchased with the suffering of ancestors who had none of those things. The 8-hour workday, the weekend, the concept of childhood as a protected time, access to education, the ability to control reproduction, legal personhood for women — these are historically recent developments, luxuries that the vast majority of humans who've ever lived never experienced. We live in the tiny sliver of history where life has become, for some people in some places, something other than constant grinding hardship. And even now, even today, there are women around the world whose lives more closely resemble our medieval peasants than they resemble yours. The struggle continues. The work of survival continues, just in different forms and different places. But there's also something to learn from her strength, her resilience, her refusal to break even when every reasonable expectation said she should. She didn't have the luxury of giving up, didn't have the option of deciding life was too hard and simply stopping. She continued, because continuation was the only path forward. And in that continuation, in that daily choice to rise and work and struggle and persist, there was a kind of heroism that our comfortable age rarely requires or even recognizes. She would never have called herself a hero. She probably would have been baffled by the concept, but she was one nonetheless. Surviving impossible conditions, keeping her children alive against terrible odds, maintaining her humanity in circumstances designed to strip it away. When you bake bread in your modern kitchen, with your electric oven and your precisely measured ingredients and your recipe from the internet, think of her kneading dough by firelight with flour she couldn't afford and yeast she'd captured from the air. When you complain about being tired after a long day, Remember that her long day was every day, with no weekend, no vacation, no retirement to look forward to. When you take medicine for a headache or visit a doctor for a minor complaint, think of her enduring agony with nothing but prayer and perhaps some folk remedy that probably didn't work. Not to make you feel guilty, you're not responsible for being born in a more fortunate time, but to maintain perspective, to remember how recent our comfort is, how fragile, how easily it could slip away, and how many people it took, suffering in silence, to build the world we now inhabit. These women didn't write books. They didn't leave portraits. They didn't sign their names to anything because most couldn't, right? They appear in historical records only as anonymous entries. Wife of mother, of occasionally a first name without surname, property transferred, deaths recorded without detail. They're invisible to history in the formal sense, but they're everywhere in the genetic sense. In the sense that everyone listening to this is here because of women like her, because of thousands of mothers in an unbroken chain stretching back to the beginning of human existence, each one surviving long enough to bring the next generation into being, passing down life even when they couldn't pass down names or stories or anything else. You are their legacy. Your existence is their victory. Every breath you take is possible because they endured. So, as you drift off to sleep now, comfortable and safe and warm, spare a thought for the medieval peasant woman rising before dawn, kindling her fire, beginning another day of endless labor. She's been dead for nearly 700 years, her name lost, her face forgotten, her body long since returned to the earth. She worked so hard. But in this small way, through this story, she lives again for a moment, acknowledged, seen, remembered. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being remembered, even briefly, even by strangers, centuries later, gives meaning to suffering that had no meaning when it was endured. Maybe it doesn't. But we remember anyway, because they deserve to be remembered, because their lives mattered, even though history said they didn't, because they were human, and they struggled, and they survived. And that's worth honoring, worth preserving, worth carrying forward into whatever future awaits us. Sweet dreams, friend. Until next time.